Right now, an unstoppable armada of American naval warships is carving its way across the ocean, packed to the brim with roughly 2,500 battle-hardened United States Marines and an absolute arsenal of heavy armor, warplanes, and lethal weaponry ready for immediate combat. The undisputed heavy hitter anchoring this strike group is the towering assault vessel, the USS Tripoli. Flanked by massive troop transports and heavily armed destroyers watching her back, she is prowling the waters with intent. This is not just a fleet. It is a floating American fortress bred for unleashing devastating aerial bombardments and pushing boots straight onto hostile beaches. They can strike without warning on virtually any shore, and this deployment is no coincidence. It aligns perfectly with the devastating blitz American forces just unleashed against Iranian military complexes on Kar Island. The raw truth emerging from the battlefield is undeniable. American firepower absolutely obliterated Tehran's hidden missile stockpiles, naval mine depots, and key operational outposts. We hammered over 90 enemy targets with pinpoint accuracy, specifically turning their weapons infrastructure to ash while intentionally bypassing their civilian oil rigs just to prove our precision. It forces a critical, hard-hitting question. Why inject an entire Marine Expeditionary juggernaut right into the powder keg at this exact moment? Are we merely flexing our muscles, or is Uncle Sam gearing up for a full-scale confrontation? To understand, you have to look at the sheer scale of the Tripoli. From a distance, you would swear you were looking at a full-blown aircraft carrier. She runs an immense 844 feet from bow to stern, weighs in at 45,000 tons, and can sustain deep-water operations indefinitely, but her true terrifying power lies in her cargo. While older assault ships prioritize ferrying boats to the shore, this mighty warship was engineered from the keel up to serve as a ruthless, fast-hitting lightning carrier. That means her deck is swarming with next-generation stealth fighters, primarily the deadly F-35 Lightning II. When pushed to the max, she can launch a devastating fleet of 16 to 20 of these advanced jets, effectively turning her into a localized apocalypse for any enemy force. Those fighters are built to drop precision hellfire hundreds of miles out, gather unseen intelligence, and rain cover fire down on our boys in the mud. Sharing the runway with those supersonic jets is the MV-22 Osprey, an absolute engineering marvel that takes off like a chopper but screams through the sky with the blazing speed of a fixed-wing plane. These workhorses can drop fully armed warfighters hundreds of miles deep into hostile territory before the enemy even knows they are there. Add to that a fleet of MH-60 Seahawk choppers constantly buzzing around to hunt submarines, haul crucial gear, and pull our guys out of hot zones. Yet the air power is just the tip of the spear, because deep in the belly of this Leviathan sits an elite Marine assault unit loaded with hardened grunts and shadow recon operatives. You have master tacticians, supply chain gurus, and heavy mechanized armor totally integrated into one floating citadel. Let us be crystal clear. This is a self-sustaining army on the water, barreling straight toward the most volatile and dangerous real estate on the planet right now, and the Tripoli never rides solo. She leads an aggressive strike fleet packing 2 extra heavy-duty transport vessels engineered to violently push infantry and armor directly onto hostile shores. Take the USS San Diego, a colossal warship custom-built to haul fighting men, heavy trucks, assault choppers, and hovercraft. Deep inside her cavernous, floodable lower decks, mechanized invasion boats can drive straight out into the ocean, violently storming any nearby beachhead with tanks, troops, and endless ammo. Then you have the USS New Orleans, another maritime behemoth tasked with delivering massive waves of warriors and their destructive tools directly to the front line. Combined, this armada delivers an all-inclusive nightmare for our enemies, allowing forces to swarm in via fast-rope choppers, high-speed Ospreys, or heavily armored boats. Tanks can crush the sand moments after hitting the surf, backed by an endless, flowing pipeline of ammunition and gear from ship to shore. All the while, the F-35 stealth demons lurking in the clouds would be vaporizing any resistance foolish enough to stand their ground hundreds of miles inland. This unparalleled, adaptive lethality is the sole reason these rapid response Marine units were forged in the first place. Yet the pressing reality remains. Why unleash this monster today? Because these strike forces live and breathe for high-stakes flashpoints, exactly like this one. Military insiders call them the nation's 911 dial, a lethal vanguard engineered to smash into global crises before the rest of the world even blinks. They are the ultimate multi-tool, capable of rescuing stranded Americans, locking down disaster zones, or executing surgical kill-capture raids. Whether it involves kicking in doors at hostile compounds, storming fortified beaches, or just parking off a dictator's coast as a massive warning sign, they get it done. By staging from international waters, America sidesteps the need for foreign permission slips. The entire wrath of the military can be unleashed from the waves, meaning in a matter of hours, these hardened warriors can crash a shoreline, lock down an international airport, seize critical ports, or obliterate high-value targets, wrap 2,500 elite killers, heavy assault vehicles, unstoppable air dominance, and overwhelming naval artillery into one cohesive fist, and you are looking at a paradigm-shifting wrecking ball that will break any adversary's will to fight. It might not be a full-scale occupation army, but it is an immediate game-changer. When a fleet this deadly sets sail, hostile regimes and global power brokers start sweating bullets. And all of this maritime muscle is surging into the combat theater at the exact same moment that American forces are dropping absolute hellfire on Iran's strategic missile hubs and military strongholds across Kar Island. Positioned roughly 15 miles off the Iranian coastline in the Persian Gulf, this piece of rock is the absolute lifeblood of Tehran's energy export empire. Yet, when the bombs dropped, American forces surgically bypassed every single piece of that lucrative oil machinery. Instead, the United States military unleashed hell exclusively on the island's defense grid, completely wiping out stockpiles of naval mines. Heavily fortified missile bunkers took direct hits, while multiple mobile launchers and firing platforms were systematically hunted down and obliterated. The relentless airstrikes also ripped through early warning radar arrays, command centers, and crucial tactical support hubs. By the time the smoke cleared, over 90 distinct Iranian military assets had been reduced to rubble. The mission playbook was calculated, deliberate, and undeniably clear. Cripple Tehran's offensive firepower without touching their petroleum lifeline, ensuring everyday Americans and global allies would not suffer a massive spike at the gas pump. You do not just park a fleet in the Middle East on a whim. Dragging an entire amphibious ready group across thousands of miles of open ocean requires massive logistical muscle and intense premeditation. When the Pentagon makes a move this heavy, it is because top brass demands total tactical flexibility. They want the power to intimidate, the capability to strike at a moment's notice, and the boots on the ground to dominate if things go south overnight. Hammering Kar Island with pinpoint airstrikes while simultaneously dropping a Marine Expeditionary Unit right in the neighborhood sends an unmistakable message to the regime. Uncle Sam is stacking the deck with rapid response warfighters ready to unleash fury if provoked, even as this powder keg continues to spark. Are these warships just sitting off the coast to flex American muscle? Will they be deployed for surgical, localized missions, or is this the vanguard of a massive, all-out regional war? Only one truth remains absolute in this moment. When 2,500 battle-hardened Marines and a heavily armed naval strike group roll into your backyard, the entire globe holds its breath. Because throwing down this kind of massive firepower is sometimes a brilliant strategy to keep the peace, and other times, it is the final move, right before the actual war kicks off.